The morning sun cut sharp, white lines across the stone floor of the small room. The woman sat on the woven mat, her knuckles white as she gripped the fabric against her chest. She did not look at the light. She looked at the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a reminder of another hour spent in this stillness. Her shoulders pulled forward, aching under the constant pressure of 12 years of physical decay. She drew a breath, the air thin and dry in her lungs, and shifted her weight to push herself upright. Her legs betrayed her instantly. A sharp tremor ran from her hips to her ankles, and she collapsed back onto the mat with a dull thud. The impact vibrated through the floorboards. She stayed there, palms pressed flat against the grit of the stone, waiting for the waves of nausea to subside. Her breathing remained shallow, rhythmic, and labored. Outside, the world began to wake, the sound of distant footsteps echoing against the village walls. But inside, the only movement was the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest. She closed her eyes, forcing her muscles to relax, and remained anchored to the floor. The woman reached out, her fingers trembling as they closed around the neck of the clay jar. It was cold, smooth, and entirely empty. She tilted it toward the light, watching as a single fine grain of dried powder drifted out and vanished into the cracks of the floor. There was no residue left. 12 years of trade, 12 years of coin, and 12 years of promises from physicians had all condensed into this hollow vessel. She tapped the side of the jar against her palm. It produced a sharp, hollow ring that echoed against the stone walls. She shook it once more, harder, hoping for a hidden fragment, but the jar remained silent. The medicine that had once been her only tether to health was gone. She set the jar down on the mat. It wobbled, then settled, a small, insignificant object in the vast silence of the room. She stared at the rim, tracing the worn pattern of the clay with her thumb, feeling the grit of the dried earth under her nail. The failure of every past attempt at cure sat in that jar. She withdrew her hand, leaving the vessel standing alone in the center of the room, a testament to everything she had lost. The woman pulled her arms tight around her torso, the pressure grounding her as the silence of the room deepened. She looked at the empty jar, then shifted her gaze to the narrow sliver of light creeping across the threshold. Her lips parted. The sound was barely a rasp, a fragile disturbance in the stagnant air. 12 years, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. She repeated the count, her voice gaining a fraction of stability with each syllable. 12 years of searching, 12 years of doors closing. She looked down at her hands, still shaking, and pressed them firmly against her knees. The tremor did not cease, but she stopped fighting it. She took a long, jagged breath, feeling the air fill her lungs with a sudden, sharp clarity. Her gaze hardened. She was not done. The hope that had been buried under a decade of failure stirred behind her ribs, a small, stubborn ember that refused to go cold. She leaned forward, her weight shifting, eyes fixed on the door. It was not a grand plan, but it was an anchor. Today would be different. She whispered the words again, louder this time, letting them hang in the air like a promise she was finally ready to keep. The woman pressed her palms into the woven mat and pushed. Her knees locked, then buckled immediately, sending a sharp jolt of pain through her frame. She gripped the edge of a low stone bench and forced herself up again. This time, she held the position, swaying as her center of gravity recalibrated after hours of stillness. She reached up to adjust her head wrap, pulling the fabric taut across her brow to shield her eyes from the sudden brightness outside. Her hands remained unsteady, fingers fumbling with a knot before she finally secured it. She took a tentative step toward the doorway. The air changed instantly, transitioning from the dry, stagnant heat of the room to the sharp, sun-baked breeze of the street. She paused at the threshold, one foot on the cool stone floor and the other hovering over the threshold. The sounds of the village hit her, the rhythmic thud of a loom, the distant shouts of merchants, the grating of cartwheels on gravel. She took a breath, held it, and crossed into the light. The ground outside was uneven and thick with dust. She stumbled, caught her balance, and began to move forward, leaving the sanctuary of her shadows behind. The woman navigated the marketplace, her path winding through the narrow gaps between stalls. The air here was heavy, with the scent of crushed cumin and sun-warmed dust. She slowed as she approached the corner where Physician kept his storefront. 12 years ago, this was the place where her last coin had been spent. She remembered the sound of the heavy ledger slamming shut. She looked at the wooden counter now, bare and scrubbed clean. The Physician was not there, but the space felt cold. She saw the familiar indentations in the stone floor where she had knelt, pleading for a remedy that never came. A sharp sting flared in her chest, a physical echo of the humiliation she had endured when he had turned his back and waved her away. She did not stop. She could not. She kept her head forward, her gaze fixed on the uneven cobblestones, but her pace faltered. Her hands twitched at her sides, still feeling the phantom weight of the medicine jar she had clutched until her knuckles went numb. She passed the threshold of the shop, the silence of the empty shelves pressing against her back like a physical weight. Every step away from that store felt like breaking a tether to a past that had tried to erase her. The woman felt the shadow of the shopfront fall over her. A figure emerged from the dim interior Physician. He did not greet her. He moved to the edge of his counter and braced his hands against the wood. His eyes flicked over her, assessing her exhaustion, then settled on her empty, trembling hands. He shook his head slowly. The movement was sharp, dismissive. He gestured toward the rows of shelves behind him, now entirely barren. There were no jars, no bundles of dried leaves, no vials of oil. Nothing remained of the remedies she had once bartered her life to obtain. He tapped the bare wood of his counter with a calloused finger, a final, rhythmic sound that signaled her exclusion. He did not need to speak. His expression made the reality clear. She had nothing left to offer, and therefore no place in his concern. He turned his back, returning to the shadows of his workspace and leaving her standing on the edge of the thoroughfare. She was invisible here, a ghost among the living. The crowd flowed around her, ignoring her presence entirely, as if she were a stone in a stream. She stood motionless, the rejection settling into her bones, while the marketplace continued its indifferent roar. The woman remained rooted to the spot, the dust of the thoroughfare clinging to her feet. The indifference of the crowd felt like a physical war, pressing her inward. She stared at the ground, watching the sandals of passers-by kick up grit. Then the rhythmic murmur of the market fractured. A sharp, singular cry pierced the ambient noise from the direction of the village gate. Traveller climbed atop a stack of wooden crates, his arms raised high. His voice cut through the air, jagged and urgent, forcing the flow of the crowd to stutter. The constant motion of the marketplace slowed. People turned, their heads snapping toward the gate. A sudden electric static seemed to charge the air, making the fine hairs on her arms stand up. The merchant to her left dropped a basket of grain. The sound was lost in the sudden collective intake of breath from the surrounding people. The woman lifted her head, her eyes scanning the sea of backs as the entire street pivoted toward the source of the shout. The atmosphere changed from mundane commerce to sharp, focused anticipation. Something was breaking the routine of the day. The air grew still, heavy with the weight of an approaching event, and she felt the pulse of the crowd accelerate in sync with her own heart. Traveller remained perched on the crates, his face flushed with the exertion of his message. Villager 1 stepped forward, gripping the edge of the wood, his forehead furrowed in doubt. He asked if these tales were mere street talk, but Traveller leaned down, his voice dropping to a gravelly intensity. He spoke of the blind eyes suddenly opened to the sun and the lame discarding their crutches to run. Villager 2 pushed closer, his disbelief wavering as he heard the specific details of the healings. The woman stood only feet away, her body swaying slightly as the words hit her. The noise of the market began to fade, replaced by the rhythmic cadence of the traveller's testimony. She watched Villager 1 lower his hands, his skepticism replaced by a hollow, wide-eyed stare. The air between them grew thick, charged with the possibility of the impossible. The woman felt her own eyes widen, the exhaustion of a dozen years momentarily eclipsed by a sudden, sharp clarity. Her hands gripped each other until her knuckles turned white. The reality of the claim took hold, vibrating through the ground she stood upon, and her breath hitched in her throat. She did not move, but her posture shifted, locking onto the source of the rumors, her entire focus narrowing to the singular promise of a change that defied every law she had ever known. The marketplace continued to churn around her, but the woman was no longer part of its rhythm. A merchant brushed past her shoulder, yet she did not flinch. She locked her gaze on the horizon beyond the village gate. Seeing past the stone walls and the moving bodies, the noise of the crowd became a distant, muffled hum, losing its power to distract her. She felt the heavy, lingering ache in her limbs, but it no longer anchored her to the ground. Instead, a new, sharp current of thought began to pulse through her veins. She tilted her head, her lips barely parting as the words formed. "If I can only touch the hem of his robe, I will be made whole." She repeated the phrase, each syllable grounding her resolve. The doubt that had shadowed her for 12 long years began to evaporate, replaced by a singular, burning necessity. She stood motionless, ignoring the jostle of passers-by and the shouts of the traders. Her world contracted into a single, reachable goal. The uncertainty of her long journey dissolved, replaced by an absolute, quiet certainty. She took one breath, deep and steady, and felt the weight of her past life slip from her shoulders. She was ready. The woman surged forward, the sudden movement jarring her limbs. She navigated the narrow alleyway with focused intent, weaving between the stalls that had once been the site of her many failures. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, worn smooth by thousands of passing travelers. But she did not falter. She reached the village gate, where the sound of the crowd rose like a swelling tide. A dense wall of people stood before her, a chaotic mosaic of movement that completely obscured her view of the street beyond. She stopped, her chest heaving, as she surveyed the sea of bodies. The crowd was packed tight, shoulder to shoulder, vibrating with a collective, restless energy. She saw the backs of villagers and the shifting weight of travelers, all pressing toward a single point. She did not hesitate. She lowered her head, bracing her body, and began to work her way into the thickest part of the throng. Each step required effort, pushing against the resistance of the press. She felt the rough texture of the crowd's presence, the heat, the jostling, the overwhelming density. She kept her eyes locked on the center of the gathering, her pace quickening. Driven by the singular need to bridge the distance between herself and the source of her hope, the woman stood at the outer perimeter, a tiny point of stillness against the chaotic surge of the crowd. Ahead, the throng was a solid, unmoving mass. Villagers and travelers were locked together, shoulders pressing against shoulders in a seamless barricade. She tried to find a gap, a sliver of space between a pair of elders and a merchant, but the people shifted and the opening vanished instantly. There was no way through. The sheer density of the gathering was a physical weight, a wall of human presence that seemed designed to keep the world at bay. She felt the vibration of their voices in the soles of her feet, a low, constant roar that threatened to drown out her own thoughts. For a moment, the impossibility of the task pressed down on her lungs. 12 years of weakness clawed at her, whispering that this was the end of the road. But the fire in her heart refused to dim. She fixed her eyes on the center of the throng, where the movement suggested a path. The crowd was an obstacle, yes, but it was not a gate. She planted her feet firmly, clenching her knuckles as she gripped her own hands together. The fire burned hotter, steady and absolute. She would not turn back. She would find a way. The woman took a sharp, shallow breath and lunged. She stepped into the gap between two travelers, her shoulder catching the weight of the man to her left. The impact jarred her, but she did not stop. She pushed her way past the initial perimeter, immediately feeling the crushing density of the crowd close in behind her. It was a suffocating, sweltering wall of humanity. Arms brushed her face, and the constant shift of weight from the people around her threatened to unbalance her at every turn. She kept her head down, using her elbows to create the smallest sliver of space. The air was thick with a scent of dust and sweat, vibrating with the collective movement of the throng. Every step was a battle against the resistance of the crowd. The bodies were packed so tightly she had to shimmy sideways to advance even a few inches. She felt the rough texture of fabric against her skin as she squeezed between an elder and a merchant. Her muscles burned with the exertion, but she kept her gaze fixed low, navigating the forest of legs and sandals. She was inside now. deep within the press, fighting for every single inch of progress toward the center of the gathering. Sweat formed in heavy, stinging beads on her forehead, blurring her vision as the midday heat intensified. The air in the center of the crowd was stagnant, trapped by the sheer mass of people surrounding her. Her body, drained by years of persistent weakness, trembled under the relentless pressure of the throng. A tall villager shifted his weight, his shoulder slamming into her side with enough force to send her stumbling. She reached out, her fingers clawing at the air, finding only the rough, unyielding backs of those who did not see her. She fell against a stranger, her feet sliding on the grit-covered stone path. No one looked down. The collective movement of the crowd pushed her further off balance, a tide of bodies that treated her presence as an obstacle to be swept aside. She gasped for air, her lungs burning, and forced her heels into the ground to stop the slide. She ignored the ache spreading through her joints. She planted her weight, shoved back against the wall of humanity, and took another ragged, shaky step forward. The goal was somewhere ahead, hidden behind a sea of moving shoulders. She would not let the weight of the crowd pull her down again. She kept moving, one difficult, agonizing inch at a time. A merchant turned suddenly, his arms swinging wide as he gestured to the stalls. The woman saw the movement a fraction of a second too late. She dropped low, tucking her head and sliding beneath the extended limb. The friction of the air told her how close she had come to being knocked off her feet. She did not stop. She pushed forward into a narrow gap, only to find an elder standing firm, his back a wall of solid resistance. She pressed her hands against the hard stone of a nearby stall to steady herself, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps that burned her throat. She shifted her weight, testing the space to the left of the man. She saw a tiny opening, a sliver of light between the elder and a wooden support beam. She sucked in her stomach, twisted her frame, and squeezed through the tight space. The rough edge of the beam scraped her side, but she kept moving. The air here was even hotter, smelling of dust and heavy breath. She pushed past her lungs, screaming for oxygen, and emerged on the other side of the obstacle. The crowd pressed in tighter, a suffocating mass of bodies, but she was through. She wiped the moisture from her eyes and forced her legs to move again, driven by a singular, desperate necessity. The rhythm of the crowd shifted. Those ahead surged forward, and the gap she had been tracking vanished behind a wall of moving bodies. The woman reached out, but her hand met only the shifting pressure of people pressing from every side. The ground beneath her felt unstable, a constant rolling motion of feet and shifting weight. Panic flared in her chest, sharp and cold. She was lost in the middle of the tide. She looked up, but the sky was gone, eclipsed by the sheer density of those surrounding her. They were everywhere. Every way she turned, another shoulder blocked her path. She tried to step forward, but the space was gone. The pressure on her ribs increased, a steady, crushing force that stole the air from her lungs. She held her breath, trying to wedge herself into a gap that did not exist. For a heartbeat, she felt the sickening sensation of being lifted off her feet, carried by the momentum of the mass. She clawed at the air, her muscles straining to find purchase on anything solid. The world narrowed to the sound of grinding sand under hundreds of sandals, and the suffocating heat of bodies packed too tight. She was being pushed back, away from her goal, deeper into the dark center of the swarm. A sudden, violent surge in the crowd forced those around her to stagger sideways, creating a brief, jagged channel through the mass. The woman did not waste the opportunity. She threw her weight against the person to her right, driving forward as the opening widened. Her vision, previously blurred by sweat and the press of bodies, suddenly cleared. There, 10 paces ahead, the path opened. She saw him. Jesus moved with a steady, deliberate pace that stood in defiance of the surrounding frenzy. His skin was deep, weathered by the sun, yet it was the stillness in his face that stopped her heart. Amidst the shouting and the frantic movement of the villagers, his eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. They held a profound, quiet stability, a calm that seemed to push back the very air around him. The intensity of that gaze acted as a physical beacon, cutting through the haze of her exhaustion. Her panic evaporated, replaced by a singular sharp clarity. She stopped struggling against the crowd and began to navigate toward that stillness. Every step forward was a calculated choice, her eyes locked onto that immovable center. The cacophony of the marketplace faded, leaving only the rhythm of her own resolve as she moved to close the distance. The crowd was too thick to navigate standing, so the woman let herself fall. She dropped to her knees, the impact jarring against the hard, sun-baked earth. The world was now a labyrinth of shifting ankles and heavy, sand-caked heels. She did not hesitate. With her palms pressed into the grit, she began to crawl. The air down here was stagnant, thick with the smell of dust and the heat radiating from moving bodies. Every inch was a battle. She maneuvered between a pair of leather sandals and the hem of a heavy, coarse weave. Above her, the throng continued to surge, oblivious to the woman moving beneath their stride. She ducked her head, avoiding a misplaced step that missed her temple by a hair's breadth. The path ahead was narrow, a jagged line of light between the forest of legs. She reached out, her fingers grazing the rough, uneven surface of the ground, searching for a path that led forward. Her movements were rhythmic, driven by a singular, desperate focus. She did not look back. She did not listen to the shouting of the travelers or the frantic movement of the elders. She only watched the space between the feet in front of her, her hand outstretched, fingers splayed, reaching toward the center of the path where the target walked. The ground beneath her palms turned from packed dirt to uneven stone. The woman kept her head low, eyes fixed on the target just ahead. The movement of the crowd above turned chaotic, a rhythmic jostling that threatened to pin her against the earth. A heavy sandal landed inches from her hand, sending a shock of vibration through her wrist. She did not recoil. She waited for the briefest opening in the shifting wall of legs and surged forward. Her muscles burned, every fiber of her body screaming against the exhaustion of the last decade. She lunged, shifting her weight from her knees to her palms, dragging her frame through the final gap. The air grew colder, a sudden shift in pressure that signaled she was close. She reached out, her fingers extended, trembling with the effort of the lunge. The rough fabric was right there. She could see the weave, the dust caught in the fibers, the the steady, rhythmic motion of the stride she had chased for years. She stretched her hand further, her arm fully extended, fingers hovering a mere breath away from the goal. The crowd surged one last time, pinning her forward, and she braced herself for the final desperate reach. Her fingertips made contact. The rough, uneven texture pressed against her skin, solid and real. She did not just brush it. She hooked her fingers into the weave and held on. The moment her skin met the fabric, the world shifted. A surge of heat, intense and blinding, exploded from the point of contact and flooded through her arm. It was not a gentle warmth, but a violent electric rush that hammered into her bones. Her entire frame jolted. The breath was knocked from her lungs as the energy forced its way into her system, racing through her veins like liquid light. Every nerve ending she possessed fired at once, a sudden, searing pulse that made her muscles spasm against the stone floor. She squeezed her hand tighter, anchoring herself to the only thing that mattered. The power was vast, overwhelming, and absolute, pulling at the very foundations of her being. She gasped, her head snapping up as the force surged through her chest, shaking her limbs and overriding the exhaustion that had pinned her to the ground for so long. The surge hit her heart, a sudden brilliant light that wiped away the cold, leaving behind only the hum of the contact. The surge hit her heart, a sudden brilliant light that wiped away the cold, leaving behind only the hum of the contact. The heavy, dragging weight that had anchored her to the earth for 12 years dissolved. It did not fade slowly. It crumbled. She kneeled to touch the very ground beneath her. The deep, marrow-aching exhaustion that had defined her every movement vanished in a single, clean heartbeat. She gasped, the sound ragged, as her lungs expanded fully for the first time in a decade. No longer constricted, her chest rose and fell with a rhythm she had forgotten. She pushed her palms against the stone, expecting the usual resistance, but her arms locked straight with effortless, fluid power. Her legs, once trembling and brittle, surged with a sudden surging strength that demanded motion. She rose from the floor not by struggle, but by a grace that felt entirely foreign. She looked at her own hands, where the dull, grey pallor of long-term suffering was being chased away by a vibrant, pulsating heat. Her skin began to glow, reflecting the ambient light of the marketplace with a newfound, healthy luster. She stood tall, the chronic ache replaced by a steady, humming vitality. She took a breath, held it, and felt the life force coursing through her veins, sharp and undeniable. The transformation was complete. She was no longer bound by the past, her body responding to every command with precise, renewed vigor. The momentum of the marketplace shattered. Jesus took one step and stopped. He did not slow down. He locked into place, rigid and absolute. The effect on the surrounding throng was immediate and violent. The people pressing against his back surged forward, but they hit an invisible boundary that refused to yield. Bodies collided with bodies, a domino effect of stumbling feet and muffled grunts that rippled outward into the street. The constant, rhythmic roar of the crowd, the shouting of merchants, the shuffling of sandals, The low hum of hundreds of voices evaporated. It did not fade. It was severed. A vacuum of sound opened in the center of the square. Villagers froze in mid-stride, their mouths hanging open, their eyes darting toward the center of the press. The dust that had been kicked into the air by the movement hung suspended, caught in the sudden stillness. Every person in the vicinity felt the atmosphere thicken, turning heavy and charged. The air grew dense, pressing against their skin like water. No one dared to take another step. No one dared to speak. The marketplace, usually a chaotic swirl of life, became a tomb of anticipation. The woman stood at the edge of the silence, her own breath catching in her throat, watching the back of the figure who had just brought the entire world to a halt. The silence held for a heartbeat, then another, stretching thin until it threatened to snap. Jesus shifted. He did not turn with haste. He rotated slowly, a movement that seemed to drag the very air in the square along with him. His eyes scanned the wall of faces, the merchants, the elders, the travelers, each person recoiling slightly as his gaze passed over them. It was a look that bypassed the surface and settled on the intent of every soul present. He stood perfectly still, a lone anchor in a sea of confused, trembling people. Then he spoke. The words did not come as a shout, yet they carried a weight that vibrated through the stone floor beneath their feet. "Who touched my clothes?" The question hung in the air, stripped of any casual curiosity. It was a probe, a demand for truth that refused to be ignored. The crowd shifted, eyes darting from side to side, seeking the source of the interruption. Jesus remained fixed, his attention narrowing until the entire world seemed to shrink to the space between him and the hidden witness. He did not look away. He waited, his posture an immovable testament to the importance of the answer he sought, leaving the marketplace suspended in the gravity of his inquiry. A disciple shifted his weight, his brow furrowed as he scanned the wall of bodies pressing in from every side. He leaned toward another disciple, his voice a low, incredulous mutter. "The crowd is crushing us from every direction," he whispered, gesturing to the sea of shoulders and elbows that hemmed them in. "Hundreds are pushing. Everyone is touching him." A disciple nodded, his own expression tight with mounting bewilderment. He looked at the dense mass of people, then back at Jesus, who remained unmoved by the chaos. "It is impossible to tell," Disciple 2 replied, his hands spreading wide in a gesture of futility. "We are being jostled by a dozen people at once. To ask who touched him here is to ignore the reality of the street." They exchanged a look of shared skepticism, their minds unable to reconcile the singular focus of the question with the sheer volume of the throng. They moved slightly, trying to peer through the gaps, but the press of the crowd was absolute. Every villager, every traveler, and every merchant was a potential point of contact. To them, it was a logical impossibility, a riddle born of exhaustion rather than intent. The disciples looked at one another, their faces mirroring the collective confusion of the square, unaware that the answer was already unfolding just inches away. The woman felt the air leave her lungs. The question had found her. She remained behind the wall of villagers for a heartbeat, her hands gripping her own arms to stop the tremors. She knew she could not hide. The space between her and the center of the square felt like a vast, impossible distance. She took a step. The crowd did not part willingly. She had to force her way through the press of shoulders and elbows. She ducked under a raised arm, sidestepped an elder who stood frozen in his confusion, and pushed until the bodies gave way. The open space around the center was blindingly bright in comparison to the shadows where she had been lurking. She stumbled, her legs feeling thin and brittle, and stopped 5 paces from him. The sound of the market seemed to drop away, replaced by the thudding of her own heart. She could not hold her posture any longer. Her knees hit the hard-packed earth with a dull thud. She looked up, her body shaking from the effort of the reveal. Her eyes locked onto his. She drew a jagged breath, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of the square. "Lord, it was me." The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of everything she had endured. She did not look at the crowd. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, then slowly lifted her head. Her voice, initially thin, gained a steady, ringing clarity that echoed against the stone walls of the market. She spoke of the 12 years of fading health, the endless cycle of failed treatments, and the physicians who had long ago turned her away with empty promises. Her hands gestured to the dust, her fingers tracing the patterns of her struggle. She told them of how she had spent every coin she possessed on remedies that never worked, leaving her with nothing but the ache in her bones. She described the weight of that long search, the nights spent in isolation, and the final, desperate belief that had driven her through the throng. She did not ask for pity. She stated the truth of her actions. She knew he was the only source of restoration. Her words hung in the air, piercing the confusion of the marketplace. The villagers, the elders, and the travelers stood motionless, their curiosity replaced by the gravity of her account. She had nothing left to hide. Every word was a testament to the life she had reclaimed. The silence in the market square stretched, heavy and thick. The woman remained on her knees, her breath catching as the weight of her confession settled. Above her, the shadows shifted. Jesus stepped forward. He did not look at the crowd, nor did he offer a glance to the nearby elders. He looked only at her. His gaze was not sharp or demanding. It was steady, holding a depth that seemed to pull the very ache from her joints. He knelt, closing the distance between them until he was eye level with her. He reached out, his hand open and calm, hovering briefly before he touched her shoulder. The contact was firm and deliberate. She looked up, her eyes wide, tracking the lines of his face. He spoke, and the sound was clear enough to reach the back of the throng. "Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace." The words were a physical force. The tightness that had gripped her chest for a decade simply dissolved. She exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that released the last of the strain. Her shoulders dropped, the tremor in her hands stilled. He did not pull away immediately, letting the promise of her restoration anchor her to the ground. She was no longer the woman who had crawled through the dirt. She was whole. The woman rose slowly, her movements fluid and devoid of the stiffness that had governed her for 12 years. She did not stumble. She did not reach for support. She stood tall, her eyes clear and fixed on the horizon. Nearby, a mother who had been watching from the edge of the market pulled her child closer, shielding the little one against her side. The mother did not look away. Her eyes remained locked on the woman, her mouth slightly parted in an expression of arrested movement. The child leaned into the mother's side, quieted by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The hostility that had earlier permeated the crowd, the impatient murmurs and the sharp glances of the elders evaporated. A palpable stillness took hold of the plaza. Those who had been pushing forward to catch a glimpse of the traveler now fell back, leaving a clear space around the woman. They watched her with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. The tension in the air changed, hardening into a collective, silent focus. No one spoke. No one moved to interrupt the space she now occupied. The marketplace, usually a chaotic roar of commerce and dispute, became a place of observation. The change was undeniable, visible in the way she stood, and the crowd was forced to acknowledge the truth of what they had witnessed. The woman took a step forward, the movement clean and decisive. She did not look at the ground as she had done for years. She looked straight ahead. The crowd, previously a wall of indifference, parted before her. She moved through the center of the market square with a steady, rhythmic stride. A group of villagers stood near a grain store, watching her approach. These were the same people who had turned their backs when she begged for help only days earlier. As she came level with them, she did not lower her head or veer away. She met their eyes, one by one. The look they returned was not the cold dismissal she was accustomed to, but a sudden, sharp recognition. She passed them, her pace unwavering. Every footfall on the stone path felt solid, grounded, and entirely her own. She navigated the narrow gaps between the stalls, turning her head to scan the surroundings with a clarity that had been absent for over a decade. The dust of the marketplace swirled around her ankles, but she did not flinch. She walked toward the main road, the rhythm of her movement echoing against the walls. She was no longer a shadow shifting between stalls. She was a presence moving through the light, with the deliberate grace of someone who had finally stepped out of a long, dark confinement. The woman navigated the winding path as the afternoon heat began to wane. Her gait was rhythmic, each step landing with a firm resonance on the packed earth. She moved with a purpose that caught the attention of those she passed. Near the corner of a sun-drenched wall, young girl detached herself from a group of onlookers. The girl moved closer, her pace hesitant, until she stood directly in the path of the woman. Young girl tilted her head, watching the woman with an intensity that only a child possesses. She looked at the woman's steady hands, then back up to her face. "Are you better now?" the girl asked, her voice clear and piercing in the quiet street. The woman stopped. She did not hesitate. She lowered herself to the ground, bringing her eyes level with the child. She reached out, resting a hand on the ground to steady herself, and looked directly into the girl's gaze. A smile spread across her face, reaching her eyes and softening the lines of her expression. "Yes, little one," she replied, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "Jesus made me whole." The girl's eyes widened, and for a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the village. The truth of the statement hung in the air, absolute and undeniable. Shifting the way, the child looked at the world. The sun dipped low, pulling the heat from the stone walls and casting long golden shadows across the path. The woman rose to her feet, her movement fluid and effortless. She did not look for a corner to hide in or a shadow to slip through. She turned toward the horizon, where the sky transitioned from brilliant amber to a deep, cooling violet. The village life continued around her, but the frantic noise of the day had settled into a steady, rhythmic hum. She stood perfectly still, her weight balanced evenly on both feet. She watched the light catch the edges of the distant hills, marking the end of the day that had redefined her existence. For 12 years, the setting sun had signaled another night of pain and isolation. Now, it marked the conclusion of a miracle that had restored her to the world. She inhaled deeply, the air cool and sharp in her lungs. She did not lower her head as the last sliver of the sun vanished behind the ridge. She remained there, a silent, living witness to the moment that had broken her chains. The shadows deepened, but she did not move. She occupied the space with a quiet, persistent strength, standing tall as the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky.